I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today, we're gonna finish up the treehouse. In the first part of this video, you saw us build this platform. We had to build a really strong structure that was anchored to the ground and then cover it with decking so we can stand on it. But we also had to figure out how to attach it to the tree so that the platform and the tree can move independently. That's for safety and for the health of the tree. So with all that in place, we've got to build a railing around it for safety and a ladder so we can get up and down. Let's do that now. To make the ladder, we're going to start with this structural steel pipe. This is in the plumbing section at Lowe's, but it doesn't have any threading because this is specifically made for ladders and furniture and things like that. This comes in 36-inch pieces. We're going to cut these in half with an angle grinder and then mount each one of these rungs in between two pieces of 4x4. Usually the rungs on a ladder are 10 to 14 inches apart, so we're going to split the difference and use 12. We're going to start about 8 inches from the bottom and then go 12 inches all the way up. And that makes sure that our top rung is not too close to the top of the ladder. These are 1-inch pipes, but I went ahead and made the holes 1 1/8 inch, so they're going to turn in there, but it's also going to allow some room for the wood to expand and contract with moisture. Currently, if I tried to pick this thing up, it would fall apart and the rungs would fall out. Eventually, it will be tied to the platform and that will give it its strength, but for now, we're going to temporarily tie these two pieces together so that we can pick it up and put it into place. The ladder's going to go right here and it'll be screwed in at the top and that'll be nice and sturdy, but the bottom is still kind of free floating even though it's sitting on the ground. So when you put your weight on it, it's going to want to try to kick forward downhill. So we're going to use one of these. We're going to mark where these 4x4s are sitting and then drive these things down into the dirt, then put the 4x4 in them and that'll stop the 4x4 from being able to move forward and backward. These are made for mounting a post in concrete, so you're supposed to sink this part down below the surface. So that's why it has kind of this pinched and then the open part on the end. But we need this to be more of a spike so we can drive it down into the dirt and use a hammer. I've got these 4-inch long screws, so these are going to go through here, but only penetrate the back about 1/2 of an inch. So I'll have to come in from the back side and drive some screws through as well to make sure it's really nice and tight. The ladder's all there and working. It's nice and sturdy and strong. There is one little problem based on where I decided to put mine. I've got it on the corner so it didn't have another thing coming down from the platform, but unfortunately that overlaps this double section. So these top two rungs actually don't have a lot of room for your foot to go. You can still climb it, it's just not terribly comfortable for an adult. So when you put your ladder on, you may want to consider putting it on a side like this where there's not a lot of vertical area that's going to get in the way. Now we got to make the railing to go around this whole thing and make sure everybody's safe. There's really specific codes and regulations around railings for decks. Make sure you look those up and follow them exactly. I'm going to be using 4x4 posts and put them all the way around the perimeter, and I wasn't really sure what to use in between those posts. So I went to Lowe's, who's sponsoring this video, and looked around and I found these. This thing does all the work for you. These are the barristers in between the pieces that go on the post. This whole thing was $38. You can't beat that. That saves a huge amount of time. So I got a bunch of these. Before we can put these in, we have to put up the posts. So I've started some screws in this 4x4. Josh is gonna hold the level and hold the piece, and we're gonna set it right here, and then I'll screw it in. Again, we're only using 4-inch screws, so we are gonna have to come back and put some from the back side to really sandwich this piece in place. For that last section of the railing, all we had to do was cut it off to fit it in the gap. And in this one, we've actually got a limb in the way. Fortunately, those things are put together with screws, so we can just unscrew the right pieces, slide it over this, and then screw them back together. Of course, that's gonna leave a gap vertically here, so we're gonna have to reinforce that and make sure that the gap in between this section is not bigger than it needs to be. If your deck has 90-degree angles, the corners are going to have a single post, but in this case we've got weird angles, so we've got 2 posts. So this plane and this plane are separate. We want to tie them together for strength. I'm going to use this corner piece, put it onto one of these, and then squeeze these 2 posts together and drive screws in on this side, and that should hold them relative to each other. Decided not to put a roof on this thing, so instead we're just going to do 2 8-foot posts on the front face. That way we have a place that we can tie some lights to the tree and stuff like that. We get all the railing put up, and now we want to cover this with like a handrail on the very top. You want to cover the tops of these posts because this end grain will end up rotting if it gets filled up with water over time. So you can either put a cap on here and then use this part as your handrail, or you can lay down something on top of the entire thing. For that, we're going to use a piece of decking. Just line it up with the two ends and chop it off. We finished up all the rest of the railing. It was done exactly the same way, but now that that's done, pretty much the structure is complete. So now it's time for some fun stuff. The first small thing we're gonna do is add a pulley to the back side of this and put a bucket on the bottom so the kids can lift stuff up into the treehouse. We've only got a couple of things for this. We've got a pulley, a carabiner to hook to the basket or whatever we want at the bottom, a cleat to tie off the string, and some paracord to use to put the whole thing together. Now, none of this stuff is made to carry the weight of a person. This is just for lifting small things. I'm gonna feed this string through here and then just tie a very simple loop at the end of this. And you can decide on how long this needs to be and then cut it off and melt the ends of it with a lighter so that it doesn't fray anymore. And then once you've got the pulley on the loop, you can swing it over and just hang it through. That way, if you ever need to move it, it's really easy to take on and off. And then at the end of this, I'm just gonna tie another loop. These are just extremely simple knots because they don't need to be anything more than that. And then once you've got the carabiner, you can just hook it through that loop and then hook it into whatever you want to pull up. I just put an eyelet in here so we can have a place to stop the rope from being able to fall down. So I'll tie this off and that will give it kind of a maximum length. The last big thing we're going to do for this treehouse is build a slide. Now you can buy slides, but usually they're made for platforms that are 4, 5, or 7 feet off the ground. This is like 8, 8.5, so we're going to make one instead. We're going to make a really strong, sturdy wooden structure that's supported in every direction and then cover the middle with aluminum flashing so it's really fast. The sides are going to be made out of 2x8s like I mentioned, and to connect those together we're going to have some 2x4s running between them. Then the center section is going to be covered with plywood, so it's nice and strong. Of course, this is all pressure treated, so it'll last outside. Then we're going to cut a slot all the way down, top to bottom, in the 2x8, and that is going to house the edge of our aluminum sheeting. It'll slide right in. So we've got our structure for the slide, but of course you're not going to slide on wood, so we're going to cover this surface with some aluminum flashing. I did have to trim this down in width because we just made a measuring error, but normally if you make the slide the same width as your flashing, you can just lay it down. So we're going to lay it down on this surface, hold it down, and then secure it to the plywood. A couple of things about this flashing. It is very, very thin aluminum, so it is going to get some dinks in it, some bends, some crackles, and all that type of stuff, but it should work over time. It's not going to rust. The big thing here is to make sure that the outside edges, which are sharp from the factory, are covered up. So we're going to cover those with some pieces of trim, but first we've got to get this fixed down. I'm going to use some really small nails. There are very specific nails made for this flashing with kind of a wide head. So we're going to nail this down along the edge as close as we can get it so that those nails will be covered up by the trim when we put it on. The slide is now tied into both sides. It's in its final position, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut off these, but I wanna leave a little bit past this post just so there's a kind of an entryway to the slide. The last thing on the slide is we want to cover this edge of the aluminum just to be sure that nobody snags a finger or some clothing on it. So we're going to cover it up with a little piece of trim. Unfortunately, it's white, but that's just what we have to work with. This is good though, because this is PVC trim, so it's made for outdoor use. It's not going to rot or anything over time. So here it is. I'm extremely happy to have this thing finished, and my kids are even more happy than I am. Big thanks to Lowe's for sponsoring this video. We got all the tools and all the materials from Lowe's, and of course it was great to be able to get those materials to build a custom slide. But if you don't need a custom slide, they've also got all sorts of playground equipment. If they don't have it in your local store, they will have it on the website. It was also great to get things like the prefab railing. That saved a huge amount of time, and it was actually really easy to work with. It was great to be able to cut out those sections to work around the limbs and to fit that in kind of the weird angles of the shape of this platform. Another thing I wanted to point out is that we added posts on these two corners, and right now those are just holding lights, but eventually those could hold a roof. In fact, it's a really good example of adding a little bit of infrastructure now can let us do all sorts of fun stuff for this thing in the future. Like I mentioned before, every tree house is different, every tree is different, and you're gonna have to do a lot of problem solving to make yours, but it will be unique and awesome. If you learned some stuff from this video, or if you got some cool ideas, I would love to hear those down in the comments. I've got tons of other types of project videos that you may want to check out as well, and if you're not subscribed, make sure you do that and hit the bell. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. See you next time. For that last section of the, what's this thing called? We've got all the railings up, and now I want to put a railing. Let me start over. You railing? What's this called? So we're going to sandwich all three of those things together in poof.